So welcome this morning. If you would, Russ is unmuted us, I believe. So if you would, just put your phone on mute so that we don't get your background noise. That'll be important just so I can focus on my
I'm
message.
able to keep everyone muted, John.
Oh, cool, you did. That's great.
Okay.
Yeah,
awesome. So you're good to go.
Let's get started. Okay, thank you, Russ. All right. So good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us on the Monday morning coaching call. I love your commitment to participating and really working on your personal growth. It's one of the things that makes us different as a company and as a group of people, the level to which we focus on our personal growth. And man, does it make a difference. So one of the things that I want to chat with you this morning about is mental toughness. You know, I believe that the number one battle of real estate agents is the number one battle of all human beings. It's the reason that agents struggle so much with this. It's because they are human. We're human. Despite what we think, we are human, and we have our challenges that relate specifically not only to the business, but also to just to life. And so one of our struggles is just simply maintaining our mental toughness. I believe it is, in fact, our number one battle as we go out and work with people, but also as we just go out and live this journey called life. So there are 5 things in particular that I want to chat with you about this morning that I think are going to be important for us to maintain a high level of mental toughness and to work through the challenges of life. The first thing is this. I believe that there are fundamentally just really 2 types of people when it comes to kind of like philosophy or the way they look at life, kind of the prism through which they look at life. There are those who are victims, and then there are those who are victors. And so if you're taking notes, I really would like you to write that down, that there are 2 types of people. There are the victims, and then there are the victors. Now, the question is, what's the difference? How do we separate the victims from the victors? What makes them different? Well, first of all, I believe that it really is about the victims are the people who are out of control. See, they don't have control over what happens, and so therefore, you know, they say that I didn't do this. You know, I didn't ask for a pandemic. I didn't ask for low inventory. I'm not asking for the competition to give away their commission. I'm not asking for these challenges, and yet I'm left to pick up the pieces. I'm a victim, right? It's out of my control. And what victims tend to do by definition is they tend to blame. You know, they point the finger at external forces and say it's because of that or them or this that I have my challenges. And it is true that bad things happen to good people. It happens all the time. You know, you probably had something as good as you are. You probably had something happen in the last, few days, the last week, the last month. It wasn't good, wasn't cool, didn't feel great. And I guess, by any standard, you could say that you're a victim, and you could blame external forces for whatever those challenges were. And many people would not fault you for that. In fact, there would be people who were going to stand in line to commiserate with you, to be there to tell you exactly, they know what you're feeling and what your experience is, because that's their experience as well. There are plenty of people who will commiserate with you when you decide to take the role of a victim. Those are the people who ultimately are out of control. It's not their fault. And then there are the victors, guys and gals. These are the people who are in control. These are the people who take responsibility. It doesn't mean they take responsibility for the bad things happening, right? Because bad things happen to us that we have no control over. None of us had control over whether the pandemic was going to occur. None of us have any control over whether inventories are going to be low, and the overall mindset or psyche of the American consumer, the American homeowner. We don't control that. But what we can take responsibility for is how we respond to the circumstances. And see, that's the defining difference between those who are victims and those who are victors. See, I believe that it's about focus. The victim focuses on problems. I have these problems, and these aren't problems that I caused. These are external forces, right? And then the victor says, well, wait a minute. Of course there are problems. There are always challenges. That's called life. And what they do is they shift their focus from the problems and they look at solutions. See, they're solution-oriented. They look for outcomes that are positive. They find ways and methods that allow them to still achieve what it is that they want despite what's going on. And see, some of you on this call, you do that very well. You play the role of a victor very well. Some of you are on schedule or ahead of schedule relative to your goals this year. And then there are some where it's because it's been a tough year, that all these external forces that we don't have any control over, we buy up on the idea that, well, it was just that sort of a year. And it was because of all of these things and because these people did that I had this tough year. So I find it so interesting that two people can be in the same set of circumstances, be in the same petri dish, so to speak, right, and have wildly different outcomes. One of my favorite stories to really exemplify this is the story of the two brothers. As they were growing up, they were raised by a father who was very abusive. Their dad was an alcoholic, and he would act out and physically abuse them, verbally abuse them. There was a lot of emotional abuse in the family, a lot of physical abuse. And it wasn't until they grew old enough, the 18, and that they were able to get out of that environment. And both went off and lived their lives the way they intended to, based upon the way they were raised, based upon their experience. And what is interesting is this, that one of the brothers grew up to be a doctor, and he was very successful. And then the other brother grew up to be an addict who couldn't keep a job, was in and out of jail, and lived a very difficult life. And both were interviewed. The doctor was interviewed first, and he was asked, so how is it that you have turned out to be this successful doctor, given the way you grew up? And he said, well, what would you expect? My father was an alcoholic. He was very abusive. And I knew what that sort of life led to. And it was my experience that I didn't want to live that life. So I went out and I got an education. And I decided that I wasn't going to drink, that I wasn't going to get involved in vices that could turn into addictions that could destroy my life the way my father destroyed his. It was such an interesting perspective. And then the second brother was interviewed and asked, so, talk about your life. What's happened and how has it been difficult, and how do you, what do you assign, your challenges to? And his answer was, well, it's obvious. I mean, I grew up in a household where my father was an addict. He was an alcoholic. He was very abusive, physically, mentally, emotionally. And so what would you expect? That for me to live this sort of life? It was because it was the impression that I got. It was, this is what I know. And I guess both answers are true. Both answers are accurate. They both grew up in the same household, and yet their outcomes are wildly different. How is that? It's because of their focus. It was one who simply looked for solutions to the challenges, and the other one who assigned blame for the problems and said, it's not within my control. It was just the way I was raised. So my question for you is, what role do you play predominantly? Because I think that it's easy for any of us at any given time during the course of the day, as we live our life, to play the role of the victim. I mean, how many times have you been on the road where somebody cuts you off and you get angry and you want to chase them down, or you want to give them the piece of your mind, give them the number one sign, right? Well, responding that way is the response of a victim as opposed to the response of a victor. Remember, victims want to blame. They want to assign blame. Whereas victors just simply look for solutions. They move on. They don't wallow in their misery. They don't let the challenges become more challenging than they need to be, than they ought to be. So my question for you is, how effective are you at playing the role of the victor, consistently doing that in your life, whether it's in your relationships or it's in your health? We don't get to control our genetics, and there are some people who are born with amazing genetics where they have the opportunity from the word go, from the moment the doctor slaps their little behind to stop them from crying, that they have great genes, they have great health. They don't have any heart issues or kidney issues or growth issues, right? And then there are people who have challenges, some more than others. But we don't get to control that. The real question is, how do we control it? How good are you at controlling your response to the cards that you have been dealt? Here's one thing that I know. So many people talk about equality. Here's what I know after having lived 51 years on this planet. There is no such thing as equality of outcome, only equality of opportunity. And the biggest defining characteristic that we can pay attention to and have to ensure that we have at least an opportunity to succeed is going to be our attitude and our focus on whether we're going to be problem-focused or solution-focused, whether we're going to be problem-oriented or solution-oriented. So that's the first thing, guys and gals. If you want to be mentally tough, make certain that you play the role of a victor and not the victim. And it's so easy in this day and age, in this society, for us to play the victim, because there are plenty of people who will stand in line to commiserate with us and tell us, it's okay, you are a victim, and you poor little old dear. The second thing is this, in terms of mental toughness. One of the defining characteristics of whether we're going to be mentally tough or not is how we respond to circumstances, whether we're going to be a reactor or a responder. See, there are those who react and there are those who respond. And again, really, what's the difference? What's the difference between a reactor and a responder? Well, I believe that the difference is this. Those who react with no forethought. They do things without really thinking about it. There's a quick action to whatever it is that they do, right? In other words, they let emotion control. And so oftentimes, the emotion that controls is not the right emotion. It's anger, it's fear, it's frustration. It's all the negative emotions that lead to negative actions. In other words, negative reactions. And then there are those who respond. Responders do things with forethought. They do it with calm. And they're able to do this because they've given forethought to it, that they recognize that challenge is not new. It's happened before and it will continue to happen. And so therefore, they practice what they're going to do. They practice their behavior. They get themselves really into a mindset and a physical form of behavior where they create great habits both physically, mentally, and emotionally. It's like a boxer. I want you to just think about this for a second. Imagine a boxer, a professional boxer who gets in the ring and they get punched in the face and they're surprised by the punch. Now, my question for you is this. If you're a professional boxer and you're in the ring and you get punched in the face, are you really surprised by that? And of course, the answer should be no, you shouldn't be surprised by it. You're the boxer. You put yourself in a ring. The other person's job is to punch you in the face. That's what they do. That's what boxers do. You shouldn't be surprised by it. See, a prize fighter who gets in the ring is surprised by getting punched in the face. It tells me that they really haven't put a lot of forethought into it. They really haven't practiced their craft, their sport, their job very much. Guys and gals, we have a choice whether we're going to be a reactor or a responder. See, a great example of responders, in fact, that's what we call them. We call them first responders. The EMTs, police, the firemen. See, those people are first responders. See, those people, they practice how they're going to respond when things get difficult, when the fire alarm goes off, when that emergency call comes in, when the ambulance arrives and chaos ensues, and the heart attack victim or the automobile accident victim or the gunshot wound victim, that when they're carted in on that gurney, that because they've practiced this so much in training, in school, through repetition, they know how to respond. They don't react, they respond. Response is this: there is forethought, and they act with calm, not with craziness, not with absolute, like hysteria. Imagine going to an emergency room and watching the emergency room staff respond with absolute hysteria. Imagine the chaos that would occur from that. See, one of the first things that they do, if you've ever been to an emergency room in an emergency situation where somebody's life is on the line, they're calming people down. They're telling the victim, it's going to be okay, you're going to make it, right? Just breathe, just relax, right? So you have to have that mindset. You can't help other people remain calm in difficult times, like we're going through a pandemic, difficult challenges, right? If you yourself aren't calm. So my question for you is, do you tend to be a reactor or a responder? Do you tend to react with no forethought? Just take quick action, whatever your emotions tell you to do? Or do you respond with forethought, with calm? We get a choice. Imagine this, soldiers. Soldiers are trained, guys and gals, to act in times of great emergency, great need. Bombs are going off. Bullets are flying. Things are happening everywhere, in the air, on the ground, machinery, men and women, guns, bombs, grenades. It's chaos. It's absolute chaos. And soldiers are trained to remain calm, and they do. They remain calm because it's in remaining calm when chaos ensues that saves their lives, that allows them to make it through the chaos. Look, life is chaos. Things are chaotic right now. I agree. Things are chaotic. You know, the numbers for the pandemic apparently are going up. And I watch how people are responding in panic, and they're wondering if we're going to go through what we've already gone through. But look, I don't know, and neither do you. But what I do know is this: the one thing that we can control is the one thing that will make the biggest difference in our experience, regardless of what happens. That's us, what we focus on. So are you a reactor or are you a responder? The third thing is this: I firmly believe that if we're going to be a responder and we're going to be a victor and not a reactor and not a victim, is we've got to pay attention to what emotions we're allowing to control. I believe that there are two primary emotions. I believe that every person on this planet, regardless of their race, religion, their creed, their color, I don't care what your persuasion is, I don't care what country you're from, the fact of the matter is that you are controlled by one of two predominant emotions. Number one, fear, and number two, love. So let me ask you a question. Which of those two emotions, fear or love, do you think most people are controlled by? I mean, really be honest and think about it. Think about the way most people live. Think about how 75%, they say this, 75% of people don't like their current job. In fact, they hate it. Why would anybody work a job they don't like? Well, I guess for fear that they couldn't find one that they would like. And so therefore, they just simply settle on a job that they don't like. So I go back and ask you the question: which emotion, fear or love, do you think is predominant amongst the average person? And I believe the answer is, in fact, I know the answer is fear. It's fear. The average person lives in fear, not in love. I mean, think about it. If the average person lived in a state of love constantly, of passion, of pursuing the things that they want, and constant gratitude, focused on contributing to the lives of other people, there would be no room for fear. And they would be doing what it is that they wanted to do. My question is, what are you committed to? Are you committed to fear and letting it control, or are you committed to love? Are you committed to passion? See, I believe that our commitments aren't what we say they are, they're what we do. And most people, although they might say that they're committed to love and passion, their actions are evidence otherwise, to the contrary. See, fear is a very dangerous thing. I mean, it's motivating, no doubt about it. It's motivating. Fear causes people to take action. I mean, you ever watched anybody in a situation where they're fearful? I mean, watch somebody who's scared. Watch what happens to them physically, right? Their adrenaline starts to rush, and they start to move quickly. They run. For example, imagine being chased by a bear. Would you walk away? What would you do? Would you walk towards the bear? Would you run towards the bear? And the answer, of course not. I mean, I know they say to us that we should just pretend like we're dead. I think that rule was written by the bears. I don't know that I would be willing to just stand there or lie down on the ground and pretend like I'm dead. My first reaction would be, I'm afraid, I'm scared, I'm running. The adrenaline would rush and everything in my body would say, run away, right? That's what I think the normal person would do. Well, I think that's what people do when they're afraid. They run away. Listen to what I just said. I think that's what the normal person does when they're afraid. They run away. They run away from their dreams. They run away from the difficulties of life. See, when life gets most difficult is when I believe there's the greatest opportunity. I mean, I look at how this company was started as Everest Realty Group and then eventually Century 21 Everest. It was started in the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression. There were people, 50% of the owners, brokers in the business who got out, 50% of the agents got out. There was a great deal of fear, not only in our profession, but also just in the world. And people were running. They were running the opposite direction of the challenges. And I get it. And yet, George and I, with a small group of people, decided to start a company and to look that fear in the face and, stand in front of it and say, we're not running. We're going to create something. We're going to build something because we believe that it's possible. And we did. See, that wasn't fear controlling. That was passion. That was belief. That was recognizing that we had dreams, we had goals, and we weren't going to accomplish those things by running away from our fears. See, the problem about running away from your fears is that you don't care where you end up as long as you get away from those fears. That's what the average person does. So my question for those people would be, aren't you tired of running and ending up in places that have no specific design or benefits to the life that you say that you want? Yeah, I get it that it's scary. I get that doing things that you're not used to doing or facing things that you don't have any control over, I get that's scary. But man, if you're not willing to be uncomfortable, if you're not willing to face your fears, you'll never live the life that you say that you want. One of my favorite stories about commitment, and despite the challenges and despite the risks, that the person just simply pushed forward, is Teddy Roosevelt when he was running for president for the third time, and he was running against the Republican and McKinley and the Democrat Wilson. And the reason he was running is because the Republican McKinley, who was his successor, was not doing a good job as far as Roosevelt was concerned. And so Roosevelt wanted to come back and protect his legacy and to make certain the country was going in the direction that Roosevelt believed it should be going. And so he ran against not only the Democrat, but the Republican. And as he was running for president, on one morning as he was exiting a hotel that he was staying in, an armed assailant approached him and put a .38 revolver in his chest and discharged the gun. And a bullet was lodged in Roosevelt's chest. And of course, everybody rushed around the president and some rushed towards the assailant to subdue the assailant. They got the president in the car and they began to drive him to the hotel room, or to the hospital. And when Roosevelt recognized that they were taking him not to the hotel where he was going to speak, but away from it, he said, "What are we doing? Where are we going?" And they said, "Mr. President, you've been shot. We're taking you to the hospital." He said, "No, we're not going to the hospital. I have a speech to give. I'm running for president." And they looked at him like he'd lost his mind because he had a bullet in his chest. He was bleeding out. And he absolutely insisted. He said, "You're taking me to the hotel." So they turned around and they took him back to the hotel where he was to give a speech. Well, when he got there, the crowd was very quiet because word had made it to them that the president had been shot. They thought maybe it was a rumor. There was a lot of murmuring going on. Well, he stood in front of that group of people and said, "It is true, I have been shot." There was a gasp, and he showed them under his suit coat and his white shirt this big blotch of blood the size of a grapefruit where he was bleeding out. He said, "I have been shot. but I'm going to give my speech, and then I will go to the hospital. The crazy thing is that Roosevelt stood there for nearly an hour giving his speech. And at times, his handlers, his security detail would look at him. In fact, at one point, walked up to him, one of the security detail put his hand on his shoulder, on the president's shoulder, as if to say, "Mr. President, we have got to take you to the hospital." And Roosevelt looked at him like, "Get your hand off my shoulder. I'm finishing this speech." Well, Roosevelt, after that point, spoke for another 30 minutes. He spoke for 90 minutes, guys and gals, with a bullet in his chest lodged right next to his heart. Talk about commitment. Talk about passion. When you talk about primary emotions, fear or love, which one do you think was controlling for Roosevelt? The man had a bullet in his chest lodged next to his heart. I mean, most people, I would say, quote unquote, normal people would be afraid, and they would say, "Forget the speech, I'm going to the hospital. I want to be saved." Roosevelt, they're talking about a man of passion, of commitment. He's like, I'll get to the hospital. I got to give my speech first. What emotion is controlling in your life, guys and gals? Is it fear or is it love? Because I believe that is the defining difference between the average person and the extraordinary person. The fourth thing is this. The fourth principle under mental toughness is this. People who are mentally tough do not live in a box. I believe that most people spend their entire time on this planet in a box, from birth to death. When you're born in a hospital room, both of which are boxes. And then when you're birthed, they'll put you in a pan, which is basically a box. Oftentimes take you to a heater or an incubator, right, just to keep you warm. And then they'll swaddle you and they'll give you to your mom, right? And then they put you in a carrier and put you in a car, which is basically a box. And then they take you to the home, which is a box, and then put you in your room, which is a box, and then put you in a cradle, which is a box. And then when you get old enough, they'll send you to school, which is a box, in your classroom, which is a box, right? And you'll grow older, and you'll get a job in a building, which is a box, and then you'll sit in your office or your cubicle, which is a box. And you go to and from work in a car, which is basically a box, right? People live their entire lives in boxes. And when they die, when we die, they put us in boxes, right? People live in boxes. And there are the physical boxes, but then there's also that invisible box that people put around themselves. The limitations that we put on ourselves, the restrictions that we put on ourselves. See, what boxes are you living in? What restrictions are you living in? When you think about it, when we were kids, one of the biggest challenges that kids have is peer pressure. And so what do kids try to do when there's peer pressure? What do? They try to fit in, right? That's what peer pressure is all about. Follow the crowd. Do what the crowd is doing. Why is that? Because you don't want to stand out. You want to fit in. So we paint these boxes, these very narrow boxes, and we just fit in. I believe that's very counterproductive. I think that's devastating to our dreams. You watch adults, how they respond in elevators. Watch grown adults and what they do in elevators. They try to avoid making eye contact. They'll look at their phone, do anything they can, right? Because you're invading their personal space. It's too close. Don't look at me. Guys and gals, if we're going to be mentally tough, if we're going to be confident, if we're going to achieve the life that we say that we want, we got to get out of our box. What it is that we say that we want, this life, this dream, all the money that we talk about, the influence, having the ability to do what we want, when we want to do it, right? Not having to worry about survival, but get to a point of self-actualization. We can look outside of ourselves and start helping other people. In order to live that way, we're going to have to trot on territory that is new, that evokes fear, that creates fear, that creates actual physical and mental resistance. Because look, here's the thing. Fear is going to be present in our lives. It's going to be there. The question isn't whether it's going to be there. The question is, are we going to let it control us? And if we let it control us, we're going to remain in our box from start to finish. Those who choose to not let fear control get outside of their box and they face their fears. In fact, what they do is they embrace fear. I'm asking you to embrace fear. Do you embrace fear? I believe those who are extraordinary embrace fear. And then the final thing is this. People who are mentally tough, they forgive. They forgive. They don't hold on to negative emotions. They don't let past relationships or challenges in current relationships control them. They forgive. You know, I've shared the story before of my mom and her sister, my aunt, being estranged for 26 years. And at one point in their lives, after being estranged for 26 years, deciding to finally meet. It took my mom having a terminal disease to get them to that point. The good news, at least they got to that point where they forgave one another and they spent the remaining months of my mom's life together. The question I have for you is, who do you have to forgive? Oftentimes, the first person to start with is ourselves. We are so hard on ourselves, right? We expect perfection, that when we quote unquote fail, we are so harsh with ourselves, harsher than any person who actually cares about us would ever be. So my question for you is, are you forgiving? Are you forgiving of yourself? And who in your life should you be forgiving? I believe that people who are forgiving are the people who are going to be most successful because they don't hold on to the baggage. And they're vulnerable. They're willing to put themselves into situations where they're vulnerable. And I believe that vulnerability, ladies and gentlemen, is a sure sign of strength, of leadership. I want you to think about this. We talk about the strength and the mightiness of the lion being the king of the jungle, or the king of the Serengeti, of the desert, right? It is the king of beasts. And it is, no question, it's powerful and it's awesome. But as powerful as it is, as strong as it is, as fierce as it is, it also is very vulnerable. See, have you ever watched a lion in any of the nature programs out in open space, like in the Serengeti, and can be visible from all the other animals around? And make no mistake about it, a lion is susceptible to attack. Hyenas will attack it and kill it. A giraffe will attack a lion and kill it. Elephants will attack and kill it. Water buffalo will attack and kill it. Other lions will attack and kill it. It's susceptible. It may be the king of beasts, but it's not impervious to attack. It is vulnerable. And there it is in its long strides out in that open space. It will sit down, lay down and roll over on its back, and it will fall asleep. I mean, I've seen pictures of lions on their back or on their side, absolutely zonked out, completely exposed. Talk about vulnerability. I believe that vulnerability expresses strength, confidence. Even despite the dangers, I'm willing to do this. I know it's dangerous, but yet I'm going to do it because I need my sleep. And I need the opportunity to see what's coming towards me, but I got to have my sleep. You're vulnerable. Guys and gals, are you willing to be vulnerable? Are you willing to put yourself in situations where you might have to swallow your pride, to forgive, to put yourself in situations where you're afraid, doing things that you're not comfortable with, engaging in activities like prospecting, calling people you don't know, confronting people on behavior that's inconsistent with what you know as a professional they need to do, pricing their home at the right price, reducing the price of their home, following your lead on what the process needs to look like to help them sell their home or to buy their home. See, are you willing to put yourself in situations where you're going to feel resistance? I firmly believe that our single biggest battle that we face on a day-to-day basis is our own mental attitude. It's our mental toughness. And I believe that if we pay attention to these 5 things that we talked about, we can gain greater control over our attitude, our confidence, and go out and live the life that we want to. And the question is, how quickly can we do that? I believe in an instant, because choosing to be a victor over a victim is just a decision. Choosing to be a responder versus a reactor is just a decision. Choosing to be guided by love versus fear is just a decision. Choosing to get outside of our box rather than living in it is just a decision. Choosing to forgive ourselves and other people, just a decision. Now, are these easy decisions? No, they're not. But they're decisions you can take, and every day we have the opportunity to decide these 5 things. My question for you is, what do you decide? What do you want? See, I believe that you have been given the gifts to live the life that you say that you want, or at least if you're not saying it, that you envision in your brain that you're afraid to share with other people for fear that they might criticize you or say, what are you kidding? What makes you think you could live that way? I believe that we're all capable of living that life. The question is, are we going to permit ourselves to do that? Are we going to unlock that potential that has been given us by our Creator? I know that it's within you. The question is, will you let it out? So I hope this has been a good conversation for you. I hope that it gets you to think about some things, some areas of your life, and maybe where there's room for improvement and what you can do to begin to take yourself to the next level in terms of your mental toughness, in terms of your actions. Remember, it is your thoughts that lead to your emotions. So the things that you focus on, the way in which you behave mentally, affects the way in which you act, and the way you act creates your reality. It is all just a decision. So if you don't like the way things are right now in your life, and there's room for improvement, then just simply take the decision to be these things, to be the victor, to be the responder, to be the person who is directed by love and pulled by love, and to be the person who gets outside of their box consistently, and be the person who's willing to be vulnerable and to forgive. Start with themselves, with yourself, and to forgive others. All right, guys and gals, have a great week. Have a great finish to the year, and go out there and be your potential. Be who you're capable of being, and go out there, most importantly, and make a difference in the lives of other people. Have a great day. We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.